Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us at this exclusive interview powered by Nemira Publishing House. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce the author of Lady Astronaut, Mary Robinette Kowal. Thank you for taking the time to see us.
I'm very happy to. Hello.
So we published this wonderful, wonderful book um, in 2020, a difficult year for all of us. But I'm
Yeah.
sure that the story resonated with a lot of our readers, and I know it was received with a lot of enthusiasm. It's a very important novel because it's one of the very few who actually won the Holy Trinity, let's say, the Locus Nebula and the Hugo Award in the same year.
hmm
So congratulations for that again, even if it's been a
Thank
year and a
you.
half.
Thank you. It was a delightful year.
Yeah. I was in Dublin when you received the award.
Oh,
It was such a pleasure to see you on the stage. Yeah.
oh, thank you. That was, yeah, Dublin was a wonderful time, even without that particularly nice moment. It was a great con.
Yeah. I would like to start because the Romanian readers are really starting to get to know you only now,
Hmm.
with sort of a basic question, which is how you fell in love or how your love story with science fiction in general and literature in particular began.
So I do not remember a time that I didn't read. I know that my mom read to me every night at bedtime, but my grandmother was a school teacher and specifically also worked in the library after she retired. So books were just constant. I remember listening to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on the radio with my dad. And so for me, science fiction has always just been part of my life. When you're a kid, they don't um, they don't separate fantasy from science fiction from just you know a story about a sponge living under the water. It's like it's just a book. And so growing up, I continued to gravitate towards science fiction. The book that I remember that that made me go, I want more of this, was a novel that I read in elementary school called Enchantress from the Stars. And and you may notice a theme there that I became very interested in space flight, probably from the beginning. Um, so so I just always have read science fiction and fantasy. And when I started writing, it was the thing that I gravitated to because it was what I read.
Have you ever tried writing anything else, anything very,
Mhm.
very different? What was that?
Yes. So the first short story that I sold was mimetic fiction. It was not, there were no fantastic elements in it at all. It was a story about someone who had OCD and was trying to mask it from the family. Um, and uh, and I've written horror. Um, uh, but every time I come back, the first series that I sold, the novel series is The Glamorous Histories. The first book is Shades of Milk and Honey, and it's basically Jane Austen. So I joke that it's Jane Austen with magic.
That sounds perfect.
Yeah, but it's a Jane Austen pastiche, and the magic is handled as uh, with as little disruption to the world as possible.
So you do enjoy writing alternate pasts,
hmm
alternate histories, because not only in Calculating Stars you do this. I know you also have other two previous novels. So that implies, I guess, a lot of research about those particular historical moments.
hmm
How does that research begin with you, or how did it begin for Calculating Stars?
So I'm always starting with an era that I'm already interested in. Um, I was already interested in the Apollo era. I was born in 1969. My parents are very proud of the fact that I could sit up to watch the men land on the moon. So I obviously don't remember any of it, but that narrative has been part of my life, and and have always had an interest in space. When the space shuttle was going up, I remember Sally Ride. I remember the Challenger disaster. So space has always just been, it's deeply fascinating to me. I think it's amazing that right now, as you are listening to this, there are people over our head living in space. Like, that's amazing. And so with the Lady Astronaut books, I was already interested in it. And the first thing that I do when I'm diving into a new historic era is kind of broad research to kind of wrap my head around the era, and to make sure that the things that I assume I know are actually true. And one of the things that I always check is I go and look for women and people of color, people who are normally pushed to the margins, people with disabilities, because I know that they are there. But those are generally not the narratives that are front and center when you're looking at historical eras. And with the Lady Astronaut universe in particular, I wrote this before. There's a film that came out in the US called Hidden Figures. I don't know if it got over there, but it's about the women computers. And so I was writing this before that film came out, and even without that resource, it became very clear very early that women were just threaded through the history of early space flight and early flight in general. The Wright brothers, their mom did a lot of the actual construction. So it's, for me, those stories are very interesting because they're the ones that are less told, and because they have an added level of complexity in the way these people have to move through the world. Because they're not only trying to invent something, but they're also dealing with all of the systemic oppression of the era that they're living in.
So you're obviously very invested in humanity's journey to space, and we're obviously making a lot of steps in that direction right as we speak. What are your hopes and dreams for this?
Well, I mean, I really do hope to see, so a lot, there's so many things that it's hard to actually settle on one. One is the recognition that that every time we have to develop a new piece of technology for space, that it winds up having a direct impact on us. You know, my cell phone, GPS exists because satellites. It's right there in the title, global positioning satellites. That doesn't happen without a space program. So one of the things that is interesting with the Wright brothers is that we go to the moon 50 years after we have flight, right? And it takes about that long for airplane travel to become common and everyday. So we're now 50 years out from the Apollo program, and we're at a point where there are rocket launches nearly every day. And a lot of them are commercial. So we're just starting to see the early parts of people going into space that are going up as tourists, going up for reasons other than government programs. And so my hope is that if we follow the track that we did with airplanes and the Wright brothers, that over the next 20 years, spaceflight is going to become something that is accessible to regular people. I hope that there will be a point where we do have humanity established on other parts of the solar system. Some of the plans that are out there, I think, are a little bit not well thought through, but I still hope for that. I still hope for that, and you know, selfishly, I hope that someday I get to go up. But I'm also 52 years old, so so it's like 20 years. How will I feel about spaceflight when I'm in my 70s? I don't know.
Well, medicine is evolving as well, so
right. Yeah. So maybe it'll be like very comfy and
But that's beautiful what you're saying, that actually looking at the stars and trying to, go into space is not only a form of escape, but it also changes our lives here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a very interesting discussion at the beginning of Calculating Stars, when actually there are the two teams, let's say, one who wants to stay on Earth and do as much as they can to save people here, and the other one who says we have to get out of here. And
Yeah, and I mean, I actually think that it's a case of both is good. You know, you never want to put all of your resources into one thing, but it's, I think that there's stuff that we should be doing on the planet. But I also know, like, a lot of the really good water reclamation stuff that we're taking into water poor areas on our planet was developed for space. So it's very useful. Space is.
yes. Well, maybe we should they should let Kim Stanley Robinson
Yes.
act on the Mars project, because I'm sure
Yeah.
he would have many great ideas.
He would. He's a very smart man.
So going back to Calculating Stars,
Mhm.
Elma York has such an authentic and beautiful voice. And I know that that she's been featured in a novelette of yours, and so you have a history with her already. So what is it about this character that you found so appealing that you gave her Lady Astronaut in the end, the trilogy?
So when I first wrote Elma in the novelette, she's based on a couple of different things. My mom and my grandmother in particular, and I had this thing in her backstory of the meteor hitting the Earth, and her getting the moniker the Lady Astronaut of Mars. And I started thinking, it's like, well, how did that happen? Because based on when you write a short story, sometimes you don't actually think things through all the way. I'm like, what would she have needed to overcome in the 1950s to get into the space program? And so I started kind of digging into her character, and the things that I enjoyed about her was that she was in this long-term, deeply committed relationship. So there's this stability, but also that a struggle that I think a lot of women today relate to, of being really smart and very good in your field and having to constantly prove yourself because people assume that if you're pretty, that you're not very smart. You know, the and that it's frustrating that is still a problem in the 21st century. But I was like, what happens if you are in the 1950s and you have all of this societal pressure on you? And then the other thing, and this is a very mechanical approach. When I am creating a character, I think about axes of power. So everybody has some areas where they are dominant and some areas where they're subordinate. In the United States, as a white woman, on the race axis, I'm at the dominant end of the spectrum. But on the gender axis, I'm farther down, and I'm not as far down as someone who is trans, because I was assigned female at birth, and that is the body that I am happy in. So there are these axes. So in Lady Astronaut of Mars, the short story, Elma's age slider is all the way down because she's in her 60s. And she's also a full-time caregiver. She's not an astronaut. So those two sliders are down. But when I move her back 40 years previously, she's young, she's beautiful, she's smart, she's upper class, she's white. The gender slider is down, but that was it. So I looked at things that you have a different relationship with over the course of your life, and two of those are mental health and religion. And so I introduced the anxiety disorder. and also decided to have her be Jewish, which she's not in the original short story. Like now she is, but that had not been part of my my conception for her originally. But it is something that we our understanding of that and our relationship changes over the course of our life, based on circumstance, based on discoveries. So those things were things that were interesting and appealing to me. And then once she existed in this expanded form, there are just so many stories to tell once you slam an asteroid into the planet. There's just so many stories.
Indeed. Well, when you write, what is more difficult, the drafting and creative part, or the editing afterwards?
Whichever one I'm doing in the moment. When I'm writing, that is the hard part, and I can't wait to get to editing. And when I'm editing, I'm like, oh, why can't I just be writing new words?
But which one takes more time in your experience for you?
It depends on the book. So Calculating Stars, I wrote in about 6 months. It was originally Calculating Stars and Faded Sky. And I know I'm sorry, I don't know the Romanian titles for these.
Well, the Romanian title is something like Calea spre stele. It's the name.
Say it again. I'd love to say it.
Calea
spre
stele.
Stella. Calea spre stella.
Yes, stele
Okay.
is the stars. Yeah.
Yeah. That one I recognize from the root. So this was originally supposed to be one book. And I started when I started into the part that became the second book, it felt terrible, because in order to do it in novel form, I was going to have to make this big jump in time, and it was jumping all of these things that I was like, the readers are going to be frustrated and annoyed. But if it's another book, because you've got a gap between books, it's like an intermission in a play. You accept that a big piece of time has passed. So structurally, I needed to split them. So that part was challenging, but the writing of them went very fast. Once I made that change, the final draft of Calculating Stars is actually pretty close to what came out. And Relentless Moon was the third book was harder, because there was a lot of back and forth on that one. That one got a very heavy edit. It was 180,000 words long when I finished it.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And so I had to cut out major plot lines. I cut out characters. It was a big edit on that book to get it down, and it's still long. The book, but and that one was, like a year or so. The book that I'm working on right now, which is a science fiction murder mystery on an interplanetary cruise ship, I have been working on for a year and a half, and most of that has just been trying to get a draft that felt good, and now we are at the point where it's revising, and the revising is going super fast. But the drafting took forever. So it depends. It's like every book is different.
I cannot not ask, how was 2020 for the writer, Mary Robinette Kowal?
Terrible. Which is part of why this book is taking a year and a half to write. It was so The Spare Man, which is the book that I'm working on right now. It's not a Lady Astronaut book. It was due in June of last year. I turned in the draft 2 days ago.
Congratulations, you did it.
Thank you very much. So it was really awful. Just like I had the time. The time wasn't the problem. It was all of that
Everything else.
Yeah. Everything else. Yeah, and not to get into politics, but being in the U.S. And being a fairly liberal person,
not a great time.
No. I was not enjoying that.
So I'm very happy to say that in a few months we're going to be publishing The Fated Sky, and
excellent.
Probably at the beginning of next year, the Relentless Moon. So for the ending of our meeting, I wanted to ask you to please tell a bit our Romanian readers what to expect from this next chapter of Lady Astronaut in The Fated Sky.
Sure. So in The Fated Sky, Elma is there's a mission to Mars. It is unsurprising, given that these began with the Lady Astronaut of Mars, that Elma is going to be going to Mars. But it's the journey that she takes in understanding that she needs to be on that mission, and then most of the book is the mission to Mars. So it's a lot of time on a ship, and then while they are aware of things going wrong on Earth, and then The Relentless Moon is a parallel novel. It takes place at the same time that The Fated Sky is happening, but it features Nicole Wargan, who is one of the other Lady Astronauts, and it focuses on what was happening on Earth and the Moon while Elma is off on her way to Mars. So, and this one is a kind of spy thriller with sabotage, and
that's so interesting. I can't wait. I sort of I don't know why I instantly thought about Ender's Game and The Shadow.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
A bit, because it's like the same thing. With story, you learn what's happening on Earth while they're all on in space. Yeah.
I think, there's Orson Scott Card, although we have different politics, he was my my mentor when I was starting off.
Oh, I have no idea.
I took his literary boot camp, and credit him with a lot of the way that I write. But I think because I also read Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow, I suspect that was part of what made me aware that the parallel novel construction was a possible thing. But it not necessarily in a conscious way, though.
No, but it gives depth to the story, so that's why I'm saying that I can't wait to read them both.
I will I will tell people, anyone who's out there as a writer, I had not planned Relentless Moon book 3 when I was writing book 2, and let me just tell you that if you think you're going to do a parallel novel, it's a really good idea to plot them both at the same time instead of having to come back later and try to make the timeline work. That's part of why the edit was so hard. It was like, what have I done? Oh my.
That's a great writing tip. Thank you for that.
Keep track of your timeline.
Thank you so much, and I really hope that we can see each other again after we publish The Fated Sky and about other projects of yours as well.
Yes, likewise. I hope I actually get to come over when we're all allowed to travel again.
That would be amazing. I want everyone to come over, and we want to go everywhere.
Yes, exactly so.